have Sarah Hodges with me. Again, she's going to be doing part 3 of a 3-part series on entrepreneur self-care, a really important topic, particularly given today's environment where everything is kind of shifting. It's really important to focus on self-care and how you can kind of lead yourself, your team to success.
Wow.
So if you are joining for the first time, we're so glad to have you here. If you have listened into all the other previous 2 and all sessions that Sarah's led, welcome back. We're on part 3 of this 3-part series on entrepreneur self-care. Sarah's going to be sharing with us today kind of the driving home factor of self-care, how an investment in self-care can end up really making you money.
Thanks, everyone. What's so awesome about today is that I think this is triple the amount of attendees that we've ever had. And I think it's so funny too, like, you know, when you tell founders, how can you make more money? They're like, sign me up. You're like, how can you self-care? They're like, I'll watch the recap. So this is awesome. And what's really great about today is we are going to review, because these webinars build on each other. So the you know, all of the tips that I taught you in the earlier, let me just get this set up here. Okay, all the tips that I taught you in the earlier sessions build on each other. It will help you kind of connect some dots to understand how self-care can help you capital raise, because it sounds very counterintuitive and very paradoxical. So here we are, how self-care makes you money for startup founders. So we're gonna do a stress 101 review, a self-care 101 review. You're gonna, for those of you who have been here before, you'll see some repeat slides and some new slides, and then we'll move on to how self-care makes you money. All right, that's what you all are here for, let's face it. Okay, so reminder, startup success is a marathon and not a sprint. So how can you reach the finish line with your health and relationships intact, right? You don't have a heart attack or get a divorce right after you sell your company, and maintain your companies until the finish line and find investors. That's a big ask on you guys. So I say something that most people don't say, which is that stress is actually good. It's just what kind of stress is good. You know, basically our stress response is what has allowed us to survive. So when we were being chased by a tiger, we were able to run it or fight it. Hopefully you can run really fast. And that would help us, that stress response would help us survive. But intentional stress, when we take on something intentional, is how we learn and grow. So when we weight lift, we put a stress on our cell and our muscle. And when we learn new ideas, we're putting a stress on our brain. When we start a new company, we're putting a stress on ourselves, but it's all intentional, it's good. The most important thing though, is that it doesn't become chronic stress, because chronic stress is what's bad. Okay, that's where you have pathology in the brain. You have hypertrophy of your amygdala, which means you become more susceptible to stress triggers. And it's harder for you to access your prefrontal cortex, where all your decision making and critical thinking is. So let's talk a little bit more about your brain and fight or flight. Now, this part is incredibly essential to self-care and to self-care as a leader and to capital raising. And it's the idea of the 3-parted brain. You see, when we are in fight or flight, we are using primarily our brain stem, our most primitive brain. And when we're feeling really safe, we're using our human brain, where we can think creatively and share new ideas and deeply connect with each other. But the bridge between the two of them is our limbic system. It's our emotions, our memories, our habits and attachments. This is where self-care lives, okay? So the startup success skills that you need to be a successful founder, all of these skills live in your PFC. They live in your higher brain function. So what we want to do through self-care is to help elevate your brain function to its highest function, to its most elevated, evolved functioning as often as humanly possible. And it takes a lot of self-care because to keep you from getting into chronic stress, you have to recover from each stress stimulus, right? So when you are weightlifting, you need a day to recover your arms. It's the same idea. And so that means after each stress trigger, your body and brain need to recover to avoid negative chronic stress, which means that self-care is essential. So if you want to use your best brain, self-care is absolutely necessary for recovery. The problem is, as we talked about, you have no time. You're very, very busy as a founder. But here's a new slide for you guys. It's this idea of the corporate cycle of health. What we use at Hodges coaching a lot, and that's your personal stress or the personal stress of your teammates lead to relationship drama because it's really difficult to clearly communicate with each other when you're under a lot of personal stress. That leads to a ton of workplace inefficiencies and personal inefficiencies. You're not bringing your best self to work each day. You have a lot of miscommunications, which then leads to more personal stress, and it keeps going around and around and around. And so what we say is start with the only thing you can control, which is your personal stress first, and that will help alleviate the rest of the corporate cycle of health. So that has a lot to do with your emotions, and I'm going to introduce today the stress bucket. So back to the three-parted brain. This is really important because emotions are the bridge from your lizard brain to your human brain. So even though emotions, people talk about them as really feelsy or wooey, there's some science backing this up that we're going to go through. All right, and it primarily has to do with self-compassion and empathy. These are the specific emotions I'm talking about, or emotional strategies between lizard brain and the human brain for you and your team. So to review, there are three primary steps of self-compassion. So when self-compassion is done well, we see that it reduces salivary cortisol, which means it turns off your HPA axis, which is jargon for it stops your stress. It makes you feel safe and neutralizes it again, which allows you, as we know, to use higher brain function. The first thing you do is you will label the emotion. What emotion do I feel? I'm feeling anxious. Is it normal given the current environment? Yeah, it's pretty freaking normal. And then what can you do to be kinder to yourself? It might mean giving someone the benefit of the doubt. It might mean taking a bath, or it could just mean, you know what, I actually don't care about this as much as I thought I did. Or, I'm going to refocus here and prioritize instead. So some science, okay? We talked about this before. It reduces self-compassion, neutralizes the chronic stress response. So it reduces cortisol and promotes physiological well-being. It reduces physiological stress, and it protects against the negative physiological effects of chronic stress. So self-compassion helps you be more resilient in the face of stress, which is really cool. So if you're under chronic stress, instead of becoming more susceptible to it, you're actually able to recover and fight it off easier if you practice self-compassion regularly. All right, and self-compassion, counterintuitively, paradoxically, is a motivator. So it motivates you to improve. It helps you be less risk averse, okay? So you feel more confident and comfortable approaching a venture capitalist for fundraising, okay, or for funding. So it reduces fears of failure and improves coping strategies, and it helps you bounce back from failures and regrets and helps you get back on the horse, so to speak. And then there's empathy, okay? And empathy is, again, one of those bridges from your lower brain function to higher brain function. And this is, I think, of self-compassion turned outward. This helps you with your teams. And empathy is also all about, putting yourself in someone else's proverbial shoes. You imagine how they're feeling, you express how you're feeling, so you're elevating each other from lower brain function to higher brain function using that bridge of emotions. And then you can find a solution, ask an open-ended question, set a boundary, whatever you need to do to get clear communication with that person, but you always use emotions first, okay? So you have to bring them from lower brain function to higher brain function, because you can't reason or critically think from lizard brain. So I know this is kind of fast, but I want to respect the people who've seen all, the slides before, and give you a quick-ish review while still digging into some of the materials, so those of you who are new understand where I'm coming from. So empathy stats, psychological safety is the most important factor for team performance and success. And I can tell you this, guys, psychological safety, even though it may sound cheesy, is one of the most important factors for capital raising. And we'll talk about that more in a second. Same thing for a feeling of belonging. If you feel really deeply connected to someone, like their family, it breeds a lot of loyalty, right? And it makes you feel really safe and secure. And any shame that we feel, which is a major trigger of stress, is also relieved through empathy. So here's a new slide to help you guys understand, okay, am I experiencing chronic stress, all right? And it's the stress bucket. So we want this stress bucket to always, we never want it to overflow, right? We always want to be able to kind of drain it from the bottom and recover, and then it's going to fill up with stress over time. And we want the stress that we fill it with to be as intentional as possible. So I want to learn this new skill. I want to, increase the size of my biceps, whatever it may be. But we experience stress from 5 primary areas. We're most familiar with the emotional stress, and that's kind of what we're talking about today. That is, considering the current global pandemic, there's some fear there, fear of uncertainty, not knowing what's going on. That creates some emotional stress. Nutritional stress is like not having enough nutrients. So if you have a very imbalanced diet, I've had like 100 Trader Joe's mini tacos in the past couple of days and probably suffering from some nutritional stress myself. Need to like have some fruit or a salad. Toxic stress. So we have a lot of this right now from all the cleaning supplies that we are using. Some of you, like, I'm hearing a lot of stuff on Facebook about day drinking. That's gonna like add to a lot of chronic stress in your stress bucket, a lot of toxic stress. Physical stress can be too much or too little exercise. And then cognitive stress right now for founders is huge. That is decision making, right? So if you have to decide whether or not you're going to lay somebody off, you have to completely revamp your strategy for fundraising because so few, venture capital teams are funding anything right now. Basically, COVID is like a fire hose in your stress bucket, okay? So it's all the more important right now to self-care so you can drain it out. And again, you self-care through self-compassion and empathy, your emotions first, to get from lower brain function to higher brain function. Okay, so I want you guys to ask yourself, what would your organization look like if your stress bucket wasn't overflowing and your teams and yourself, you were all using your highest brain function? Like, think of the efficiency, think of the clarity in your communication, and think about how much easier it would be to pitch to investors. You'd make more money, right? You'd have less turnover, you'd have more efficiency. Most importantly, you'd stop the corporate cycle of hell. So now let's get to the meat and potatoes, what you're all here for, self-care to make you money. And, in our last webinar, I spoke very briefly about a couple personal things. I haven't told you guys hardly anything about me, but what I will tell you is this. I coach a lot of founders of startups. It's one of my passions. I also coach a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of managing partners. In fact, I am married to one. So I am very familiar with both sides of the spectrum, okay, of how the venture capitalists tend to perceive things, at least how he does, and how my clients do. And what the companies and what the founders are trying to convey when they are capital raising. So how can self-care help you raise capital? Let's go back to your brain when you feel safe. Your brain, when you feel safe and you use your prefrontal cortex, to its maximum, right? You have all of the necessary requirements for pitching to an investor. You have better decision making. You can communicate clearer. You can reason with them. You can socially engage. You can genuinely connect, and you're less scared of the word no, right? And I mean, honestly, I could have highlighted all of these. You need mental clarity to choose the right words, focus for the conversation, vitality and energy to really engage in the conversation, creativity to explain something in a new way. All of those things live in your PFC. And so if you go into a conversation with an investor and you feel really nervous or scared or stressed out, or some of you may say, well, I don't ever feel nervous or scared or stressed out, but you might actually kind of flee. You might withdraw a little bit and feel shy and have a more difficult time connecting with them. There are many different ways that founders will show up when they're having a discussion or when they're, pitching at an investment conference to investors. So I have to move my little screen here because I'm blocking my own words. Okay, so self-care, as we've demonstrated earlier, creates emotional health and safety. This is what allows you to authentically connect with your investors. I recommend letting your investors lead, which we'll talk about in a second, and that allows you guys to really show up as equals so you're not pursuing them and then you don't become the tiger and they start running, right? Self-care and that emotional health and safety helps you really deeply instill a sense of confidence in your investors. They see you as a confident person showing up, as a strong leader. It develops trust and rapport much, much faster. And it helps you, feel confident and comfortable communicating your passion, because every one of you who's leading a company is doing it because you're passionate about it. Otherwise, you'd be freaking crazy to do what you're doing, right? And it also allows you to deeply engage. And all of that comes from a place of feeling safe, which means using self-compassion and using empathy. So, right here we go. So step one, apply self-compassion to your fundraising. Okay, use the steps of self-compassion to reduce your own personal stress and anxiety before meeting with investors. This can go actually a really long way. To say to yourself, you know what, I'm feeling really anxious because this is a big deal. If they invest, this will, change the trajectory of my company and my life. It's totally normal that I would be nervous. So I'm just going to go in and let what happens happens, talk about my company with passion, and, give myself a break if it doesn't work out. That can go a long way. Or you can shorten that to a mantra, which is like, it's okay, just connect. And that can be how you just self-soothe every time you walk into an investor meeting or every time you walk onto in front of the podium to pitch your company. And step number 2 is empathy. It's okay to genuinely connect with investors, putting yourself in their emotional shoes, share your emotions, and ask open-ended questions. Oftentimes conversations with investors become so didactic. It's like, everyone tries to give like a mini pitch, right? And there's so little real, genuine conversation. And yet investors are human beings. Again, I'm married to one. He is very much a human being, so genuinely connecting with them and, finding some common ground, or even just sharing, like, in an appropriate way, your struggles or worries or fears can really go a long way in developing rapport and trust with your investor. So here are some concrete tips whenever you are communicating with investors that will help you use that empathy and connect with them on a deeper level. First, focus on why you're doing what you're doing instead of what you're doing. Everyone wants to talk about the details of their companies, and that's great, but it doesn't mean much if you haven't conveyed your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you passionate about it? How is it going to change the face of healthcare? How is it going to solve a major problem? I guess that's some hows, but still, why is all of that important? Really know that, feel that, connect with it, and be passionate about it when you're conveying it. Maybe even put yourself in the investor's shoes. Maybe they have someone who died from cancer and you have an oncology company, and you say, I don't know if you've been touched by cancer, but if you have, most people have, this can be a solution to prevent that from happening in the future, prevent other people from dying from cancer. So it's okay to connect with them on a personal level. Let the investor lead. This is huge, and you can only do this if you are operating from a place of emotional safety and security. Otherwise, you come across as desperate. Okay, I've seen a lot of conversations that my husband has had with just totally normal people, and then all of a sudden, when they find out he's a VC, they become freaking weird. Or like, I have conversations with really great human beings, and when who are founders of companies, and when they walk up on the podium to pitch, they sound like didactic robots. And and it's okay to just be a human. And let the investor lead. Ask them open-ended questions. Be direct. Ask them their preferred follow-up. Listen, I know you're probably inundated with phone calls. What's best for you? Like frequency, when do you want me to call you? How do you want me to reach out to you? Is email better? All of these things can then also soothe the investor to know that you aren't going to turn into the tiger, right? And they're going to have to run from you. And just connect as humans. Like everybody's out of toilet paper right now. Like, there's certain things everybody is suffering under this current COVID crisis. Like, it's just something that, as human beings, there's always something that we can connect with, even when there's not a worldwide pandemic. And be direct. So here are some examples of open-ended questions that you can ask your investor to help, let them lead and to connect with them more and to be more direct with them. It's okay to ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in our company? But let me say this, if you aren't feeling confident and emotionally safe and secure, you're not going to ask that question because you're not going to want to hear the answer, right? You want to hold on to that hope, and you have that fear that they're going to be like, oh, we're interested at a 1, hopefully not, right? ask for permission. Would it be okay if I asked you some questions to get your permission or to get your opinion on our company? Would it be okay? Could I take 5 minutes and just, ask you your feedback? Asking permission helps the person on the other side of the table feel safe and secure and know that, if they say, actually, I have to run, they know that you respect their time, and showing them respect helps create that bond, that trust and rapport, and that social safety that you want to develop with your investor. You can ask them, what aspects of our company interest you the most? It's good to know what you're doing well. What would you like to see more of? How do you hope we change and develop in the future? You want your investor to know that you're trying to grow. You're trying to, be a company who's going to, be able to finish the marathon, right? What do you think are our greatest challenges? What do you think are our greatest strengths? How would you like us to follow up? What works best? Phone, email, text, and what frequency would you like me to reach out? There are infinite open-ended questions that you can ask. And I highly recommend practicing, even writing some down, because they're not our natural way to interact with people. We tend to want to control the conversation because it makes us feel safe. Think about our current environment right now and how much uncertainty there is and how stressful that uncertainty is. Well, when you go into a conversation with an investor, it's the same thing. You don't know what they're going to say, and that uncertainty creates stress within you. So we try to control that by asking yes or no questions, and then when you ask yes or no questions, you're leading the conversation as opposed to it being really open. And instead of asking those yes or no questions and trying to control the conversation, it can be much more helpful and to develop trust and rapport, to soothe yourself first, make sure that you feel nice and safe and confident and are operating from higher brain function, and play some improv, right? Ask open-ended questions and let the investor take the lead. So let's review. Okay, what did we learn? Stress is good. Oh, did she really just say that? It keeps you alive and it helps you grow, especially when that stress is intentional. Chronic stress is bad. It hijacks your brain. It keeps you from using your highest brain function. It can actually change your brain over time. Recovery is essential. After each stress trigger, your body and brain need to recover to avoid negative chronic stress. That's where the self-care comes in. Then self-care is essential. If you want to use your best brain and create successful teams, your self-care is essential. And a lot of this comes down to compassion and empathy. Compassion and empathy will bridge your lower brain function to your higher brain function and help you stop the corporate cycle of hell and raise some capital. And emotional safety helps you genuinely connect with investors and communicate your message. So make sure that you are mentally preparing yourself by using emotional language before you talk to an investor, and bring it into the conversations with investors. That's totally okay. So let's discuss. Oh, and I'm still offering a free one-on-one session for leaders for stress management, because I know these are really difficult times. So I think they posted it on LinkedIn, and there'll be a follow-up email with scheduling information. I'm sure you guys have questions. I hope you do.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sarah. This was great. We already have a few questions coming in. And so
Great.
Just to announce to everybody, you can submit questions either through the Q&A function or the chat function. I'll be monitoring both. And as Sarah said, she is offering some great free session, a free first session. I did one. It was absolutely amazing. I highly, highly recommend it. But we'll go ahead and launch into the Q&A real quick. So a quick question from Kevin, who said, "This is great, thanks. If your company is a benefactor due to the pandemic, how do you suggest one share that? At the same time, show empathy for what is occurring?"
Oh, that's great. I wish that this was, more face-to-face, right? Then I could ask you some coaching questions to help you think through it. But, so essentially you're saying that your company is benefiting from the pandemic, but you also, want to show respect. That makes sense. So, I would say, first let's talk about some feelings. Obviously, I imagine that you feel really happy that your company can contribute and can help out during this difficult time, and I'm sure that, you feel very grateful and like one of the lucky ones that, isn't suffering quite as much as other companies may be during this time. And I think that just taking a second to own that, the gratitude that you feel, recognizing that not everybody's in the same shoes that you guys are, and that you have a solution to offer can go a really long way to, instead of being like, oh, well, we're doing fine, to just recognize the overall, but see how the emotional language comes into play. Like we're feeling really grateful, we're happy that we can help out. That emotional language brings some credibility and clout to it.
I think that's great. There's been a handful of companies in the Jumpstart Foundry portfolio that are absolutely benefiting from the current environment. Being a healthcare specific fund, of course, you're going to have solutions and entrepreneurs that have businesses or technologies that are going to benefit in an environment like this. And I think you're absolutely right. If you can convey or communicate, the recognition of the severity of the situation, but the gratitude for the fact that you have a technology that can probably help people or help organizations better care for people. I think framing it in that way is great. Just maybe some advice that I've given some of our portfolio companies is hospitals especially, but patients, really any healthcare organization is in a very seriously stressed position right now. Now is not the time to necessarily be playing hardball with health systems, even though you may want to do that because they've been playing hardball with you for many years. But this is a time where there's an opportunity to really step in and act as a lead by example by providing maybe a software service that is going to really help people in this very stressed situation. You can do it at a discounted rate, or volunteering some time with the full knowledge that you're going to reap the benefits of that action and that generosity down the road. I think that has been a tactic that many of our portfolio companies have taken over the last couple of weeks, and it's working really well, knowing that yes, this time they're going to benefit from the relationships that they build at this time. And so being thoughtful about how they start those relationships from a place of empathy is really important. So
true. And that builds rapport.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Okay, so we have another question, Marcy. So she says, it feels hard to give myself permission for self-care when there's so much time pressure right now with the investor market. We are also a company that benefits from these times, so we need to generate revenue too. How do I slow down and take time for myself?
Oh yeah, these webinars were made for you, Marcy. It's the problem, right? You have no time. So I'll go back to kind of the very first session that we had, which was the self-talk. There's a person inside of you right now who's saying like, you don't get to take any time, like all hands on deck, you have to do this. But now we know that if that happens and you're suffering under chronic stress, you're not bringing the best you to work every day. You're not going to be working at optimal efficiency. So self-care isn't really we think of it as an indulgence, but it's really necessary. And so a lot of it's reframing, right? It's saying like, I feel overwhelmed right now because I feel like I don't have any time. I think it's normal considering what our company does and the current environment. I think what I need to do is take a walk and just let myself think for a bit, and I should ask you this, Eller, but if you tried to reach out to Marcy and she said, oh, sorry, I wasn't available, I was taking a walk. Like, are you going to lose respect for her? Or, because I would have a lot of respect for her that she was actually taking care of herself. You're like, okay, good. This founder is balanced. She is being smart. And I think that it's also a lot about setting boundaries. Sometimes that's the self-kindness piece, recognizing the emotion, normalizing, and then saying, from this time to this time every day, this is going to be me time to recover and self-care.
Yeah. And I also, just to add on that, again, something that I do personally, and it was something I actually pulled from Sarah's first webinar, was, that self-care can come in many different forms. And that again, Sarah, you said it can sometimes feel indulgent to, to partake in self-care. But something that to me didn't feel indulgent because I wasn't pulled away from my work, wasn't pulled away from my email or my computer, was literally just letting that voice in my head speak to me while I was working, saying, I'm doing great work. I'm awesome. That positive talk that, again, while I was working, just saying those things really helped kind of clear my mind, feel more confident, feel like I had a better control in the situation. So Marcy, that's something that I've done. It sounds totally cheesy, but I swear like it was the most productive afternoon of work I've had, just saying those words to myself. And it does really help. All right.
I love that you shared that.
I know. Like I said, I was in my mind, I was like, wow, I sound so corny, like saying this to myself, but it did work. Okay, another question from David. As a founder, I'm used to being productive at my office. Now that I'm working and living 24/7 at home, how do you suggest carving out self-time while keeping productive at home?
Oh yeah. So this is back to boundaries again. And boundaries can be for yourself or boundaries can be with other people. So I don't know if I can't read your message, but I don't know if you have children or a dog or whomever coming into your house, but setting clear boundaries of like, okay, in an alarm from this time to this time is going to be me time to just let my brain wander, or every 50 minutes I'm going to take a short break and just walk around my house, whatever it may be for you. Like, you're going to have your own ideas that work for you. And then if it's, if other people are in your home as well, it's setting boundaries, and it can be in really, really small bite-sized pieces. 5 minutes can go a really long way. But boundaries with yourself and others.
That's great. And then I have one more question, and I think I read it wrong. So Woody, for me, that was my error reading it wrong. You don't need to elaborate. A pretty simple question, Sarah. Do you have any books that you would recommend kind of focused on the topics that you discussed today? And if not, if you don't have them right now, we can't tell you to think of them right on the spot. That's totally fine. We'll include them in the blog post that we publish.
Yeah, I mean, I read self-care and like leadership books, just crush them. And so there's so many that I can think of. I want to give this a really good answer. And so I'll give you a list of like my top 10 or something, and send it out, and why. Is that cool?
That would be perfect.
Awesome.
Today, thank you for attending. Sarah, thank you so much for completing this amazing 3-part series. I think it was really helpful. We appreciate all the work you do. And anyone on the call, please don't hesitate to reach out to Sarah. She's an incredible coach and can help you navigate some of these tough times where there is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of entrepreneurs needing to raise capital, needing to lead their teams through muddy waters. She can help clarify, help inspire, and I highly recommend you reaching out to her.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this opportunity. I really had fun putting these together for you guys.
Wonderful.
And I love that you celebrate self-care and respect it as a company. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's something that, at Jumpstart Foundry, we really, I've said it kind of in the first and maybe even the second webinar, it's something that we really focus on in the early stage. And this can kind of be my closing statement. In the early stages of building a company and being early stage investors, one of the biggest things we actually rely on is the mental health and clarity of the founders. If we cannot rely on that, it's really hard for us to see how we can invest in that company. Because typically in the early stages, everything rests on the founder and that small team that is kind of day in, day out, building the product, getting it to market, raising capital. If we can't rely on the founders to take care of themselves, how can we expect to rely on them to take care of the company that they're building? We can't. And so it's incredibly, incredibly important for us that all of our founders are practicing really, really smart self-care, so that I know that they're going to care for the company, the investment that we've made. And so with that, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, thank you for listening in. We will be sending this out as a recorded webinar, and our amazing marketing team will be publishing as a blog post as well. So feel free to share with any friends, colleagues that you think also need to listen in on something like this.
Cool.
Thank you guys.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.